Real Talk, where we put the real in real estate, and we get to talk to Phil Crone, the real deal of the Builders Association, once the beloved at the Dallas Builders Association, and now at Leading Builders of America. Phil, thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ashley, and hopefully I'm still beloved and people but I'm still around here in Dallas, and I'm glad to join you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Phil, so we've had you on the show before a couple of different times throughout the last few years, and that was at your post at Dallas Builders Association, but you've since transitioned to this national position. So maybe talk to us a little bit about your tenure in the construction and the new home industry, and then what you get to do now at Leading Builders of America.
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate that. I spent 17 years at the Dallas Builders Association, and most of those as the executive officer there. So a lot of, as the name implies, local politics and a little bit of the state stuff, and did my best to be the voice of the housing industry in the Dallas market. And now with a more national role, I'm getting a chance to see it through the vantage point of not only the 21 large production builders that are part of the Leading Builders of America membership, but also in different states and some of the associations that and individuals that represent the industry there, and the challenges that they have, many of which are different than what we have in Texas, different politics, certainly in a number of cases, but also some similarities as well.
That's great. So, especially at Dallas Builders Association, you aligned yourself, or at least we championed together at the association level, trying to make sure that we could affect conversations around smart policy, regulatory patterns, concerns, permitting issues, different things like that, so that we could help steer local municipalities into the right direction, so we can continue to produce new construction homes, because it's no secret that we have a massive shortage. So, Phil, currently right now, how short are we on homes in the United States?
That question was one when we had our CEO meeting back in November that they spent most of the time trying to figure out. But just for purposes of our discussion, I'm going to go with what NAR's number is, and that's that we're short 6.5 million homes, and that's
wow.
We're building 1 million homes a year. Even I can do that math. We're a long way off from being able to shore up that supply.
So that's the biggest thing, because somebody would sit there and say, well, just build more homes. Why can't the builders just build more homes? And I think that's a very singular perspective. And I think there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. I think we're all a little weathered from the COVID production issues, and those aren't still present necessarily. I think there's still a lot of residual factors that we're dealing with, but we were short in supply even pre-COVID. So, that's obviously something that put us even further behind the 8 ball. But you and I were talking before, and I think this is something that our viewers really need to understand. What are not only the challenges of and I don't want to say it's not mass production, it's faster production of new construction homes and products, but also affordability is a huge concern of that. And so right now there's a HUD proposal on the table for FHA and USDA homes to meet a 2021 energy code requirement. So maybe you can kind of tell us what that looks like, what that closely mirrors, and why that is such a disruption for the home builders and subsequently for the home buyers.
Yeah, you bet. And I'll do my best, because if I bring up energy codes, it's ultimately a great way to put your audience to sleep. And
we don't want that.
So, bear with me on, we'll just take kind of the high level impact here. This is a proposal by HUD that would have all new homes rather, that are secured by FHA or USDA loans to be built to the model 2021 energy code. And with, again, not getting into too many of the nuances of that, the big issues we have here are typically energy codes are set by state and local governments, and they have different approaches based on different parts of the country have different climates, and then also you see different building practices here in Texas than you do in other places. So having essentially a federal energy standard, and this has just been a pattern that we've seen in terms of climate regulation, poses a real affordability issue, in particular for FHA and USDA buyers, where you have uh, low down payments, and those have traditionally been the primary gateway for first-time homeowners, home
Sure.
buyers, buyers of color, and so you're having an expensive mandate that's not really valued in the appraisal process in terms of those energy efficient features, falling on the most vulnerable, the shoulders of the most vulnerable new home buyers. That rule is was proposed back in May, and it's due out any day now. So that'll be something you'll see crossing the wires, where some news outlets are going to say it's the best thing ever and it's long
Mhm.
overdue. Others will say administrative overreach. I'm just here to say that it's going to harm people who have already been harmed significantly and are finding a tough time making the way in the market, and that's a real concern to everybody.
Yeah, and so there's, I mean, a lot of stuff is coming for an already marginalized subsect of home buyers, whether it's just a first time home buyer, as you already said, a minority home buyer who's been squeezed out of a marketplace between building costs, labor, increased labor costs. Land taxes, insurance, everything above, unprecedented regulatory environments, because that's a major concern. If a builder is not willing to build the house at this proposed standard, if it passes, then that means that it would not qualify for an FHA or USDA loan. Is that a correct summation?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show the just how challenging this is. Where on one hand you have a code that probably adds about $8,000 to $10,000 in this area in upfront costs, but yet it would be the building standard for the most vulnerable and entry level part of the market. And you could see the contradiction there, where a builder will have to essentially in Texas and in 45 other states that aren't that don't have codes at that level, will have to choose between this potentially federalized energy standard versus providing the financing that we know has been, in those cases, a primary entry to the home ownership opportunity since the Great Depression. As long as those have been around. So that's been a that's been a challenge. You've seen it manifest as somebody's asking about, as it pertains to gas stoves and fossil fuels, and look, there are plenty of ways to address climate and efficiency and affordability, but we're never going to find a right way to do the wrong thing, and this is the wrong way to go about it.
So yeah, we've got Lori Selecki is asking Miss Fudge. I love that acronym, or that that namesake. We're putting the nickname on there. But the desire to require updates to existing homes regarding pipes and gas fixtures, is this still coming down the wire? Do you think this is still something from I would assume more of a universal standpoint that we're going to continue to see at the forefront of these conversations?
Well, I think there's kind of a conveyor belt with some other things coming behind uh, this HUD rule, and like I said, the final version should be out any day now. There's talk of it going with the 21 code mandate going GSE wide, and so essentially everybody could be dealing with this, or obviously some ways to challenge it that we and other housing associations are going to look at. But then it'll go on to, I know there's a lot of talk about resiliency and what can be done there. And certainly we've seen some attempts to change appliance standards to to favor electric over gas, although the tide's kind of coming out a little bit on that, just with public outcry as well as where some of the courts have come down to.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Phil, for a second, because I think that is something that's been, on from the media side that's talked about a lot is, converting to gas or to electric from gas. And now, to your point, we're actually seeing some, opposition research that's coming out that's saying, whoa, 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 that might not actually be the most favorable thing to do for environmental purposes, or cost purposes. So let's talk about that a little bit. So, what is that opposing narrative that's coming out now that's kind of pushing back?
I think a lot of it, and you're seeing it come up not just in the housing context. We're seeing a big debate on we're seeing a big debate with EVs, and is the
Yeah,
time right for it? And it look, the way I cook, which is just to try to heat up a few ingredients and throw it in, may just be fine for an induction cooktop, but
sure.
if somebody is actually a decent cook like my wife is and like my mother is, and they may value gas appliances more than someone like I would, but we don't need uh, the government trying to impose a one size fits all restriction in that way. I think down the road, if we're looking at, for example, accommodating EVs in homes, there are sensible ways to do it now. Provide the conduit in the wall for wiring it later. That'll reduce the rehab costs. But to try to install today's technology for an uncertain tomorrow just doesn't make sense at this time.
Well, and I think the other portion of that people have discussed was obviously the burden on an already compromised energy supply and grid. And that's obviously something that we've had at the forefront in Texas for the last few years, discussing that and what that impact would be. So it's good to hear that conversation is shifting a little bit to at least take that other side into consideration. So going on, affordability is of course the large conversation around both of our industries, which we are in the housing industry, but us from the practitioner side and you from the builder side. But affordability is attacking us at every which way. We'll get into insurance, regulatory issues, and different things throughout the show. But I think skilled labor concerns has been something that you've talked about, I know, for years and years and years. And I feel like it's fallen on deaf ears because this this is not a shock. But we haven't done a ton to really try to figure out how we can close that gap. So I guess talk a little bit about what are those concerns over aging labor population of trades workers, and is there something on the horizon that we, I say we, are working on to kind of shore that up or encourage others to get into the industry?
Yeah, you bet. Labor is the one thing that it was an issue pre-COVID. It's an issue during, and it's going to be an issue for the foreseeable future. We have fewer workers today than we had before the Great Recession. In the housing industry, as you alluded to, we have an aging workforce. I think the average age of a lot of our skilled trades are anywhere from the high 40s to uh, early 60s. And again, nothing against anybody that age. It's just that these are very physically intensive jobs.
Sure.
In instances, many of those people that have been in those jobs have had great years because of that shortage, and so there's every incentive to retire here in the near future. So who's coming next? And I think that's a product of we do need to fix our immigration system, and I don't think this is a partisan statement.
Sure.
The way that our workforce can step out of the shadows and confidently onto the job site and provide the same opportunities that have allowed immigrants to build our nation, but we also have to make the industry attractive to young people and redefine schools and what success is. My wife used to be a teacher, and she'd always teach to standardized tests. And she said, "Hey, we were really good at making kids mediocre at what they're not interested in instead of extraordinary at what they are interested in."
Right.
And I'm seeing, as much as Gen Z is getting maligned, every which way. I saw a really encouraging article. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal about how they're potentially the tool belt generation, that they're not wanting to take on the massive amount of student debt and everything else that was told to millennials like myself that was the
Yep.
only way forward. They're seeing for themselves that there are great careers in construction, either as a gateway to get to somewhere else, or something they can do for the rest of their working lives.
Well, and I think that's something, I've always been really passionate about. And I tell my daughter this, if you want to be a marine biologist, you're going to have to go to higher education. But to take on debt just to take on debt, I think was something that was not only normalized, but it was something glamorized, to your point, in our generations, Phil. And it's nice to see that pushback. And on the realtor practitioner side, I can tell you, I've seen a lot of people who make a substantial income that, for one way reason or another, can't afford because of their debt to income ratio, and a big portion of that is student debt. And so from that side, I think it's great to really push going to trade schools and understanding what that looks like. But I think we finally, to your point and your wife's point, get kids passionate about that at an earlier age. They don't know what they don't know, and introduce that in middle school and high school, and doing that. And you've been a big proponent of that in our local schools here. Are you seeing that continue to, catch fire or become more popular, whether it's in Texas or in other areas of the country as well?
Yeah, I really have. Of certainly with kind of our flagship program in Dallas up at Collin College and their construction management program. I still speak to them every semester. I see that program uh, getting larger every time I'm up there. That massive technology campus is now bursting at the seams in every single trade program. Even more encouragingly, the program, the student population in their construction management program is 25% women. There's still plenty of room for growth there, but if you look at nationally, the women make up only about 11 or 12% of the construction workforce, so they're double the national average. I mean, all those things are exactly what is needed and who's needed to solve this problem. And I think it's just a matter of letting parents know that you can be successful in these careers, because I know every parent wants their child to be successful, and perhaps more successful than they were. We just have to redefine what that looks like.
I think that's amazing. And I think from our side of the industry, just about everybody knows a realtor, and that's what something we can do too, that positive reinforcement on that there are options and opportunities for every skill and every desire in the construction industry. So that's great. Let's talk about insurance. That's another thing that we can't run from. In fact, Patrick Bet David was having a conversation about insurance. I was just watching a little clip actually earlier today, and that was something that they were bringing in. And they're on the more of, I mean, I think he got into the industry as on the life insurance side and everything else. No stranger to the insurance business, but that was their conversation, that on the homeownership side, that's the unsexy part that people tend to not talk about, are insurance, taxes, and maintenance. And so all three of those come into play on the new construction side very heavily. So, that's when we're talking about ongoing affordability. You have the initial affordability crisis of acquiring a property, but we also then have the cost of ownership, home ownership after the fact. And so new homes and new construction is still one of the best opportunities for middle America and our first time home buyers to have a more consistently budgeted tenure of homeownership, specifically when you're talking about the maintenance costs. But it's insurance too that we need to kind of shine a light on. And Texas is got a very heavy spotlight on the inaffordability with insurance, and in fact, just insurance carriers that are pulling out of the state altogether. So New construction, though, poses, a real positive for insurance companies because obviously a newer product is going to be more favorable on those premiums. So, what does that look like, in regards to new construction? Are you guys having those conversations around that as well?
Yeah, we are, and I know, kind of like building codes. That's another, it's an important but sometimes a mundane topic. But
Yes.
as you alluded to, but I tell you, on just in its purest form, insurance is a product of and a reflection of risk. I mean, that's
Hmm.
what the premiums and policies are tied to, are people that study the risk, and whether you think it's climate change or anything else. I mean, fact of the matter is we're seeing more storms, we're seeing more fire events, we're seeing them happen
Right.
with frequency and intensity that we haven't seen before. That's just the facts. And so correspondingly, in some cases, the insurance regulation has not allowed the market to keep up as it should and allow for the gradual adjustment of rates. We've seen that happen in actually California and Florida for different reasons, but also, as you alluded to, it creates, I think, an opportunity to have the conversations that we're having on the distinctive qualities of new construction and how there are more resiliency features that have just come into our building codes as we understand more about how homes and buildings interact to the elements and extreme weather conditions. I mean, we saw that, if you remember, back in 2019, the tornado that went through
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
basically, the Preston Hollow area, and it affected hundreds of homes, but everybody walked away from that weather event because, fortunately, for the most part, those were newer homes that were impacted, even though it was an infill part of Dallas. A lot of rebuilding had occurred, and those homes did what they were designed to do. A lot of them needed to get rebuilt, but they protected the occupants, and everybody was able to walk away. And that's what's incorporated into our designs, and that's why we're trying to, just with proof in the pudding, but also with just the conversations of, the best thing you can do is build a new home in terms of resiliency, and that needs to be reflected in the insurance rates that are seen for new construction.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, hopefully we'll see a little bit of that favorability that's coming on. And I think so much of what we're seeing in, I mean, I get it, nothing is charity. Insurance companies are charting, multi-billion dollar losses. And so they've got to figure out how to, turn a profit, but at the same time, that risk pool is something that needs to be looked at. And I think, again, we need to be talking with, especially our buyers that are on a tighter budget and really need more assurances that new construction does pose, a better predicted rate of increase on insurance premiums and things like that in their newer state. So that's a huge thing. I think you and I talked about, and I know that hasn't been a big conversation, but has there been a pushback, or not a pushback, but has there been conversations from people outside of the building industry in regards to wanting maybe to see a different type of product used in new construction, whether it's roofs or the exteriors or anything else that would be more favorable, or any of those type of conversations having any as all? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to see in situations like what we're experiencing, there'll be some entities out there that just don't want to let a good crisis go to waste, and
Yeah.
so regardless of what's been incorporated into building codes, they want to go further and faster, and it doesn't matter what the upfront cost to them, because it gets a particular product or practice that they have an economic incentive in, mandated, instead of something that would otherwise have to compete in the market. So we're seeing that all the time. We see it in energy codes. We're seeing it with resiliency and those sorts of standards. And we just have to kind of take stock of where we've come, and what's already in our codes, and how well, when push comes to shove, these structures are are able to perform. And that's, I think the waterfront of that is, the people I work with out in California are making that point, and have the evidence to prove it in wildfire situations too, which is a particular challenge out there.
All right, so we've talked about what are some of the pressing issues of squeezing affordability on the actual construction part, ongoing, and what's slowing the production. But we haven't talked about where you can build these homes and what is causing us some issue there. And I think the biggest word that we are hearing, and I say it's the dirty D word, which is density and zoning. We are obviously having a lot of those conversations right now in Dallas, but that's something that's happening all over the United States. And so, um, I think especially the last 20, 30 years, if you're seeing new construction happening, consistently, it's a, traditional suburban type neighborhood with, those single family detached homes on a certain type of lot style. And, that's great. But eventually we run out of raw, purposeful land, or there's certain land, farmland, different types of land that shouldn't be developed. So there's opportunity with all of the, you know, lack of inventory that we have currently. We need to build more. That nobody's arguing that, but that doesn't mean we have to build more of one type of product. So let's talk about that for a little bit. What you guys are doing at Leading Builders of America and other builders in your industry, having those conversations about good density projects and what that kind of looks like.
Yeah, it comes full circle, right? I mean, we let off the show talking about 6.5 million homes is what we're short, and so everybody knows that we have to build more, not only to make up for that gap, but to just accommodate population growth. When you
Yeah.
don't, prices rise until someone moves away and makes room. And unfortunately, scarcity always hits the most vulnerable people the highest. So, what you have to do to get over these artificial supply constraints is figure out ways to have that all the above approach, which does include density in places where it probably should have occurred a long time ago, but there have been certain entrenched forces that have prevented that from happening, and they don't manifest in any particular political persuasion. I mean, from the left, you'll hear, don't build those homes because they're too harmful for the environment, too expensive. They make the people building them too much money. And then from the right, you'll hear, well, we worked really hard to make this a nice place, and that's why people want to live here. And so more housing is going to dilute that. We hear that a lot in Texas, and so that NIMBYism can pop up without a particular political persuasion, but at the same time, while everybody realizes that we're in a housing crisis, they'll be and are frustrated because their kids or grandkids can't afford the
Hmm.
opportunity of home ownership the way that they could. Oftentimes, they're the first ones to light the torch and carry the pitchfork down to the zoning hearing for the fourplex down the street. And I think between um, some policy changes, and I know Dallas is talking about comprehensive zoning reform, trying to add density where it makes sense, getting things that will allow for home ownership and not just exclusively the buy rent approach, or do we have to look at everything's got to be one thing or another, whether it's an ADU or build to rent. I mean, it's again all the above, and I hope that zoning reform here, as it has in some places across the country, will share that approach and accommodate that and work on the premise that we have a shortage, we need more density, and we can't throw these individual projects to the wolves every time and make it difficult to build.
So you're using a lot of logic, and I love that. But unfortunately, logic doesn't always push, progress in some of these conversations. So, I mean, what are you guys doing? I mean, in conjunction, obviously, with realtor associations and other trade associations, what can we do to have a reframe the conversation around density from just um, you know 300 unit apartment buildings, or just a square quadplex that's not in conjunction with um, the rest of an area or a neighborhood. I mean, I think that's where everybody goes to the exception, not the rule. They go to the worst case scenario. And I think that's really where we, as industry leaders, can reframe those conversations on what that kind of looks like. So conceptually, are people showing and talking about what density could be and what it could look like in a way that's much more palatable for a traditional single family area, that maybe it would actually bleed in and blend in beautifully, in that. So, are you guys doing that?
Yeah, we I did a bit of that at the Dallas BA. We're having a similar conversation through more of a construction defect law lens in Colorado because the condominium market has pretty well been dried up thanks to overzealous litigation there. But really, a lot of these do come down to uh, zoning. That conversation has been pretty proactively occurring in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. I've been talking to the group up there that represents builders there. Austin, as much as I hate to give them credit for anything, good job, at least in that regard. And I think it's just you have to have that neighborhood buy into a comprehensive plan. I think if you deduce it down to an individual project, you're going to see all these armchair building officials show up, and that's just not a conducive way to build out our city. I think having this neighborhood looks this way. Um, we have a nice place and we want to share it, but this is if we're going to go a little more intense on the density, this is the next notch forward, and we're going to allow in anything by right that looks like this. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the high rise apartment right next door, but it is going to mean that there's going to be some more opportunity for smaller homes and some things that will still fit the neighborhood, but also buck the trend a little bit in a way that we can maybe start shoring up that 6.5 million figure.
And that's something that I think we're seeing a lot. And you mentioned that the younger generations. I think they're the ones that are coming back and saying, I might not need as much, because in the late '90s and early 2000s, it was the bigger the better. Let's build a big box, a big 2-story box, 3,000 to 4,000 square feet, and let's fit as many rooms possible. And now we're seeing people that are willing to go to a smaller footprint, to get quality housing in an area that's commutable, because it's great. We keep on talking about, well, there are areas of affordability, but we're pushing people out of the nucleus in which they want to, live, work, and serve and commune and all of those things. And I don't think the answer can always be, we'll move out further. That's a real tone deaf solution when we still have the ability, even in some of these built out cities, to kind of redirect some older products, whether it's commercial. We're seeing schools being repurposed, old shopping malls, retail districts, different things like that. So you talk about people that are doing, or areas that are kind of having good conversations about that. But we talk about the commercial subsect of how it's really a ghost town in a lot of areas with the vacancies and the delinquencies on commercial. Are we also seeing that that's something that you guys are kind of focusing on how to redevelop, older, outdated commercial products that could be retrofitted to residential?
Yeah, I mean, those unfortunately a lot of times will bring the same opposing forces in there.
Yeah.
But again, you can't have a community if you don't have your teachers and your first responders living amongst that community. It in a lot of ways that involves commercial retrofit to residential in and of itself can be difficult, but if zonings there. And again, you have a if this then that type of scenario that everybody's on board with, at least at the city council level. You're not going to run into some of these um, zoning hearings that are kind of defined by my neighborhood achieved absolute perfection the moment I arrived, and I don't want any more of this or any more of whatever red herring traffic, etc. Comes with it. That's unfortunately what we see happen so much, and we've got a lot of good things on our side in terms of demographics favoring some good demand for the rest of the decade. The average age of a first-time home buyer is 35 years old, and they don't need the big box. They just need a roof over their head and an affordable place to call home. And we need to find some more comprehensive and permissive ways to make that happen for them, as well as our kids, our grandkids, our seniors, and everybody that's looking out there and not necessarily able to afford what they could, pre-pandemic. And those, that's a completely different market that we find ourselves in now than what we had back in 2019, unfortunately, in terms of affordability.
Well, and that's a great segue into what does that starter home look like now? And not that long ago, it looked very, very different. And so, is there a pathway back to a starter home product that builders can afford? Because I keep on going back to this is in charity. So builders still have profit margins. They still have to be able to maintain certain overhead and profit models. So is that something, or is that something that builders on a whole are just thinking is extinct, and we're going to focus our efforts in other places?
No, I think purely from a business standpoint, I mean, if you look at it, the National Association of Home Builders stat that I always go back to, for every $1,000 you increase the price of a house, and that could be for any reason whatsoever, you price 140,000 American families out of that opportunity. And if you look at it from a business standpoint for a builder, every $1,000 that you can have a home become less expensive opens up the market to 140,000 more potential customers. And
Sure.
what business wouldn't like that? But at the same time, if you want to get back to pre-pandemic levels of affordability, you need one of these three things to happen. You need income to go up by 60%. I'm not getting that kind of a raise this year, and I don't
No.
think anyone else is. Or home prices to fall by 40%. If that happens, something really bad has happened. We don't want to wish for that. And then mortgage rates to fall by 4.5 points, and uh, that ain't happening.
No.
Certainly not by that amount. So what you can control is some of these things related to the hard cost of land and the size of a house, and that's why we're turning our attention to that instead of some of these other things that we can't control or sit around and hope for.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I think that's the biggest thing is it's we always go to the negative, and that's why I want to talk about what we can do, what is within our control of advocacy or informing appropriately, and what can we do as an industry and as realtors that we can reshape that. And I think a big part of that, Phil, would be to continue to get more involved in an understanding of what are these zoning conversations that are being had in all of the areas, not just through North Texas, throughout the state. And so, I think that's something that's really important. And I know our government affairs department is keeping us apprised of what that's looking like. And I know there's not a one size fits all solution. And I think that's the hard part too, is that we need to be able to help architect these conversations. And that's why it's not always the most fun conversation around these things, but it's very much needed when people don't understand why the new construction costs continue to go up and up and up, is these unfriendly regulatory environments as different phases are opening and different restrictions that are being put on. So, we always appreciate what you do, Phil. So let's talk a little bit about Leading Builders of America, because again, we know what you're doing on the Dallas side, and while you're still here, you are having this national conversation. So what is leading builders of America? What is that charge, and what made you passionate about taking on that role?
Yeah, you bet. So LBA itself is a CEO led sort of business roundtable like organization that's comprised of 21 of the largest production builders in the country. The total market share nationally is about 40%. So those 21 members will build about 40% of all the new housing in the country. And so my role in particular is to both look at some of that boring code stuff that we talked about before, but also the most consequential issues in the states where there's an awful lot of housing volume. Of course, Texas being number one there, but then California being definitely number one in terms of the amount of challenges, and then everywhere in between from uh, some code and regulatory issues in Florida and North Carolina to water issues in Nevada and Arizona.
So essentially, I mean, you're doing a lot of what you were already doing on the North Texas front. You're just having these conversations at a national level, with the other CEOs that contribute to that. So, what does that look like in a way of legislation and working with our elected officials? Is that something that is still heavy on your docket to have those conversations with policymakers?
Yeah, really heavy on my docket, and then also working with state level operators in those different areas, whether it's the lobbyists that we have or the state and sometimes the local home builders associations that are there. Occasionally, there's crossover, certainly that's of mutual concern to the housing community with an NAR, and still keep in touch with Matthew. We had a fire drill, him and I, on something a few weeks back, and so it's nice to be able to use the network of friends that I was able to acquire and put together and work with and get to know while I was at the Dallas BA, and then go plug into a network of people that I'm getting to know better here now at LBA.
Well, and that's what we appreciate, that two-way communication, Phil, and being able to still have that. So, just for giggles, let's discuss what that fire drill was for a minute, because I think I was sitting there running a board meeting, and all of a sudden I have Matthew Church, our government affairs director, jumping up and saying, "I need to share something." Oh, and that's my child. Hi, baby. Love it when your 10-year-old sits there and watches you on YouTube.
Yeah, especially she's gone and watched it for 43 minutes, so she's a big fan of mom. So
She is. No, so that was something that was, while it didn't materialize, was of concern, and that was a change that HUD was looking at. So do you mind just kind of talking about what that looked like? And again, while it didn't materialize, that's something that we always have to be aware of these changes coming down the pike.
yeah, that was just something. Typically, FHA has different standards that properties that they're going to secure, new and existing, have to adhere to. One of them deals with the proximity to a high pressure gas transmission line, so not the one that's going to your house, but the ones that are running from maybe the gas treatment plant to the power plant, and those run all over the place
Sure.
in Texas, especially. And so the clarity that we were looking for was whether, as the current rule says, is the distance or the buffer between those lines and or the easement for those lines, and is that measured from the dwelling or the improvement, as it traditionally has been, or is it going to be measured from the property line, which is going to be a different
Yeah.
can of worms there. And luckily, it's there aren't any changes there, but it was one of those where hey, we're hearing something, we don't know if it's true, let's find out what's going on. Let's kind of band together. And there are so many things like that where, and I hope that that your membership appreciates this and knows that there's so many issues like that that we'll deal with, or Matthew will deal with, or
Yeah.
your government affairs team will dispense with, that you have no idea what happened, and
Mhm.
that's by design because they were able to defeat or defang something, and nobody was harmed, nobody was wiser, and we're able to move on and continue to be the housers that we are. It's when things pop up that are challenging. That's what you see, but there's so much more below the surface on that iceberg there, and that's just one little example.
No, and that's great, and that's why we appreciate the ongoing relationship there. So we have just a little bit of time left, Phil, and so I kind of wanted maybe some practical talking points or takeaways for our viewers to be able to kind of summarize from what's going on in the new construction side. So, we've talked about the skilled labor concerns, just the aging demographic of the people that are in the construction business, and the lack of younger individuals that maybe are getting in that. And so I think it's great that we're continuing on that conversation, but that's a big part of the affordability. But then we also still kind of have a COVID hangover on supply chain issues. And I think that's something we haven't really touched on right now is, what does that look like? I mean, because during COVID, that was an absolute mess. And
Mhm.
is the hangover still from, production? Is it from transit and logistics and being able to get the products? What is still causing that, which is also creating a mountain for new home builders to deal with?
Yeah, a lot of it. I think I probably told you all before. It was like I was playing whack-a-mole on supply chain issues, and it's like, now what? And there's those days, at least, are the whack-a-mole days, are long behind us, and there's certainty and stability back there, a little bit more so with inflation coming under control. But I think this is kind of coloring everybody's view on the economy, is that we dealt with so much inflation so fast and things, while it's not increasing to the extent that it did, it's still a lot higher than what we'd expect it to be, and wages aren't keeping up. Yeah, I think the one exception on the supply chain stuff, we're still having a really hard time getting electrical transformers, basically the things that take a big transmission line and split it up into smaller ones that can serve individual homes in a residential subdivision. And those that just has to do with the supply chain of the steel that it takes to make those, is also being used heavily by the electric vehicle industry. There's only one supplier left in the U.S. They can't keep up, and it's just a lot of those things that just shows how interconnected everything is in the housing ecosystem, and how that interacts with so many other industries, and one little air bubble in the gas line there can cause the engine to stall if we're not careful.
So, what do you think, with just a few minutes left, what do you think are probably the most imminent concerns that we should be aware of, just facing us today, and not that anything that obviously we can sit there and fight along like samurais with you, but what are things that we really need to be aware of? And when we're having those conversations with our clients about affordability and what that looks like, that we really need to be taking into consideration.
I think first and foremost, just uh, how significant that housing shortage is,
Yeah.
and how that's manifesting, and how much that's encumbering the market and its ability to um, deliver homes at the price point that it used to, and needs to. I think when you look at the environmental regulations that are out there, there's a need to rationalize the legitimate concerns associated with climate change with the legitimate concerns that uh, emanate around our housing crisis. We have a climate crisis. We have a housing crisis. We need to solve both. We don't don't make one worse by trying to solve the other. And that's that's something we're talking about with this administration. But also just the fact that there are a lot of, as we discussed before, there are a lot of inherent benefits to new construction in terms of how resilient they are, how efficient they are. I think green building and resource efficiency has gone from an aspiration to an expectation, and that's an expectation that's being delivered upon, no matter who you buy from, and no matter where you are. We're poised to do more there, but it there's also the conversation that we need to have with zoning, which I know can be difficult when it's happening on your street, but I think people need to see the larger societal impacts of not just what's happening now, but how zoning has been used, unfortunately, to exclude people. Definitely not as explicit as it was uh,
Sure.
back before the Fair Housing Act. And we're certainly glad that those days are behind us, but still to the same effects, and still to the exclusion of a lot of aspiring home buyers, and we need to continue to improve.
All right, so let's end with some more exciting things, and maybe not things that you're leading the charge on, but what are some good things that are going on in the new construction side of business? Maybe some product types or trends that we're seeing, or just some different ways of production. Are you seeing any kind of exciting trends on that side that we can maybe look at the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, and I'm not saying that it's gonna come mainstream tomorrow, but I know one of our members, Lennar, has been using 3D printing down, in the I guess Austin area, or one of the northern
Sure.
centers there. That's pretty cool to see. There's an awful lot of yeah, I think an awful lot of things happening on the design side with AI, and I know it's overused in terms of AI this and AI that, but I think there's some things that uh, builders can do now with the sales experience that they couldn't before, between that and virtual reality, that can provide a pretty neat immersive experience, and ultimately we're seeing a lot of the interior design trends, which certainly aren't my strong suit to see what's going on, but the way that technology is redefining those has been pretty cool. And just as we've been talking about, how much homes have been able to operate more efficiently, not just from energy, but from a water standpoint too, has been really neat to see how quickly we've been moving here. And then, as I mentioned, just overall, there's a lot of good things happening in terms of demand. The rumors of the demise of the American dream are greatly exaggerated, because there are an awful lot of aspiring homeowners out there, and I know that Metrotech's members work with them every day to make sure that they find the home that is best for them to grow their dreams.
Well, and I think that's an amazing segue into Shanae, who said we'll see everybody Thursday at the White Party, and the White Party is actually one of our advocacy fundraisers around tree pack, which is a big portion of what we do, and advocating and having those relationships with our elected officials, and making sure we are having those qualitative conversations continuously, because home ownership is the fastest and most efficient way to lessen the gap of generational wealth and continued prosperity. And that is really discouraging. I know, Phil, for your industry and for ours, collectively, to see that people honestly think that owning a home is getting more and more out of reach. And so that's where it's nice to have the conversations when you know that there are builders that still know a sweet spot is to still figure out how to build that affordable product to re-envision what that new product and utility might look like with density projects and prefabrication and 3D printing and artificial intelligence helping to streamline the process. We demonize technology all the time, but it's not like talking about robots out there starting to be bricklayers. But technology obviously can be a useful resource to help streamline the construction process and other ways that can help reduce that. And I think those are the things that are exciting about the progression and the evolution of the industry. And it's good to hear that more of that stuff's going on. So, we obviously are out of session this year, but we've got a new legislative session that's happening next year. So I keep on saying with just a few minutes left, but we really do just have a few minutes left. What does that look like? I mean, because we do a lot of our advocacy work and having our conversations leading up to that. So Phil, how does Leading Builders of America and DBA and MetroTex have a voice in imparting some wisdom and having those conversations before next session?
Yeah, it's to try to get at it succinctly. I mean, we're all housers. We're all on the home team.
Yep.
We all need to be on the same sheet of music in terms of what's needed with housing supply, why Texas has been a leader, and why people keep moving here. And a lot of that's the attainability of housing and what's needed to keep that occurring. And I think that conversation, while it's still a little far out to know exactly what the specific issues are, I know the conversation is going to need to be had, and the relationships are going to need to be maintained with elected officials to get them to understand and appreciate, why we are counting our blessings here in Texas, and where things can go wrong and have gone wrong elsewhere, because there's a lot of animosity between the Texas House and the Senate and some of the statewide elected officials, and our ability to rise above that and convey that message is going to have an awful lot to do with our ultimate success here when they gavel in January.
Well, we appreciate all that you do, Phil. You are a busy man, and appreciate your multitasking as always with us, and having these conversations. While they're not always the most exciting, they have to be had, because we have to know the backstory. We have to know what's going on behind the curtain and behind the scenes to understand how we can continue to advocate for homeownership, how we can have these conversations in our backyards, and that we need to help people with understanding that not in my backyard mentality, and not being a part of architecting that future for the future generations is pivotal. Or else the next generation is not going to be empowered to have that same ideal of home ownership, and that's so greatly important. So, Phil, as always, feel free to text or call Matthew with more fire drills in the future, and we always appreciate your support. And yeah, no, I mean, Stephen, we hear you. I mean, that's something I think that we're, trying to do on a consistent basis. And Phil, I know you guys are leading the charge as well. So anytime we can help you, we are here, and thank you for imparting the wisdom this evening.
As always, thanks for letting me have the opportunity to visit, Ashley, and always enjoy doing so. So take care, and
Perfect.
Thanks.
We'll see you soon.
All right, great.
Bye-bye.